should know, coming to you from Cambridge Community Television here at WCCR in Cambridge, Massachusetts, just off Mass Avenue. Today's program is going to be about the Green Party, about Jill Stein's candidacy as presidential candidate for the Green Party, and exactly why, after the withdrawal of Bernie Sanders, this is the only party that it would make sense to elect. Of course, the Republicans with Donald Trump, his candidacy is so scary that many individuals are asking themselves why he's even in the race. He does not seem to be interested in winning the candidacy. His behavior, his comments, his actions in opposition to so many advisors within the Republican Party seems to indicate that he has no interest in becoming President of the United States, and we can all be thankful that maybe his rationale for acting as irrational as he has been. Hillary Clinton and the scandals and the distrustworthiness that she has put on display over 30 years of her campaign, not to mention her actions as Secretary of State, leaving not only many questions about her personal conduct and professional unethical questions of the use of her servers, the use of selling information that she had as Secretary of State. All of those are questions, but there is a even more fundamental point in reference to Hillary Clinton's campaign, that being that she has a secrecy and distrustworthiness about her that lead many to look for another opportunity, driving them into the camp of irrational candidates like Donald Trump. So today's question is going to be an examination after having clarified the fact that neither of those two candidates, neither the Republican nor the Democratic Party candidate, would be acceptable, and the reasons why they're not acceptable, an examination of the conditions we have here in the United States. We'll start off with the question of the absolute disaster of climate change. The crisis in climate change is apparent at any month of the year. The last 10 years have shown a steady rise in the temperature in the United States. The hottest 10 years of this of the recording period of temperatures worldwide has occurred in the last decade itself. The disaster that we have seen in consequence of climate change is visible monthly. If it's the question of disastrous floods or the floods in Mississippi and Louisiana, the crisis of massive fires, the rising sea levels, devastating islands and low-lying nations throughout the world, the crisis that the entire world structure, economic, social, political structure, will be seriously hampered by continued rise of the sea level and temperature rise, leading to disastrous consequences for the organization and structure of political, social, and economic life. The realities are that it makes no difference whether or not the change in climate and the heating of the atmosphere is created by a man or created by nature itself. The consequences of a combination distributing the blame does not solve the problem. And a change to a energy source and energy sources which would enable a reduction of the rise of climate temperatures is precisely what is needed. And the advantage is that the massive amounts of energy gained by solar, wind, and thermal energy can create easily an economic structure which is not only ecological in nature, but would create a thriving economy with the structure of 20 million jobs, so is the estimate in the United States, and create an energy grid which is democratic, which is not destructive to the atmosphere, and non-toxic for the species. The alternative that the elites prescribe and demand, because the elites have an interest in maintaining the status quo and maintaining their superlative position within the status, is that we continue the same type of economic structure, polluting the atmosphere, and then make some kind of gigantic effort to create a species that is capable of existing on Mars or on planetoids revolving around the Earth after the Earth has been polluted, and it's not possible then to use it whatsoever. This type of throwaway economy, this type of throwaway resources is typical of precisely the economic structure which has caused the crisis that we're in now. For instance, the wars for resources, the destructive wars going on primarily by chemical advocating wars for oil by exactly the companies and corporations who profit from them, the oil corporations, the munitions corporations, and the incredible destructive nature of these wars in the migration of millions of individuals, disrupting economies, social, political structures worldwide, as we're seeing not only in the southern border of the United States, leading to the rise of candidates such as Donald Trump, big mouth, misogynistic, violent, harebrained, and reactionary, or the crisis in the European Union, in which gives rise to other reactionary sources, such as the right-wing parties and the efforts of a nation, Turkey, on the southern border of NATO, exercising its repressive actions against liberal politicians whom the Turkey government accuses of creating a coup. It's simply the effort of Turkey then to eliminate a center-left political force which would be in opposition to his extenuous right-wing movement. So without further ado, let's get a look at the campaign and politics platform of Jill Stein's Green Party. as we've mentioned, the first part of the campaign in Jill Stein's platform for 2016 is a climate change action protecting Mother Earth and humanity. Her campaign platform is enact an emergency Green New Deal to turn the tide on climate change, to revive the economy and make wars for oil obsolete, to initiate a World War II scale national mobilization to halt climate change. In other words, the effort of the nation then to stop fascism brought about a very progressive economic structure led by the forces of a great economist, John Kenneth Galbraith, who continued after the war as an economist here at Harvard, local Harvard University. To create 20 million jobs by transitioning to 100% green renewable energy by 2030 and investing in public transit, sustainable agriculture, conservation and restoration of critical infrastructure. The Green Party continues with implementation of a just transition that empowers those communities and workers most impacted by climate change and the transition to a green economy to ensure that any worker displaced by the shift away from fossil fuels will receive full income and benefits as their transition to alternative work. This is absolutely necessary, and we initiate the reality for those saying that climate change and that the costs can't be carried. We remind those about the costs of $6 trillion for the costs of wars for oil and the disruption of the Middle East since 2003. $6 trillion, an immense sum of money, and one which has not led to a sustainable economy. It has not led to the regeneration of the economy. It has simply led to the destruction of a system in the Middle East and the threat of terrorism, which is playing exactly into the hands of the reactionaries in the United States. To end destructive energy extraction associated with infrastructure, fracking, tar sands, offshore drilling, oil trains, mountaintop removal, natural gas pipelines, and uranium mines, to halt an investment in fossil fuel infrastructure, including natural gas, and phase out all fossil fuel power plants, phase out nuclear power, and end nuclear subsidies. To support a strong, enforceable global climate treaty that limits global warming to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius and provides just financial compensation for developing countries. To label GMOs and put a moratorium on genetically modified organisms is what a GMO is. And pesticides until they are proven safe. To enact shorter environmental justice laws and measures to ensure that low-income and communities of color are not disproportionately impacted by harmful pollution and other negative environmental substances. Jobs is the next area that is taken into account in this Green Party platform by Jill Stein, and it's an excellent part of the platform. It says, create a living wage for jobs for every American who needs work, replacing unemployment offices with employment offices. Government would be an employer of last resort, and the unemployment would have an enforceable right to make government provide work, to create direct public employment, as a Works Progress Administration did in public services and public works for those who can't find adequate employment, to advocate workers' rights to form unions, achieve workplace democracy, and keep a fair share of wealth they create, to replace NAFTA and other corporate free trade agreements with export American jobs, that export American jobs, depress wages, and undermine the sovereign right of Americans and citizens of other countries to control their own economy and political choices, to enact fair trade laws that benefit local workers and communities, and to repeal the Taft-Hartley Act, which banned secondary boycotts and permitted states' right-to-work laws. To enact a federal just cause law to prohibit firing without just cause. And these programs are interesting for the simple reason that they are created to end poverty. That is the idea behind these, to guaranteeing economic human rights, including the access to food, water, housing, and utilities, with effective anti-poverty programs to ensure every American a life of dignity, to establish a right to a living wage job, to perform public assistance, to be free and to be truly safe. Let me read this again. To reform public assistance to be a true safety net that empowers participants and provides a decent standard of living, a free universal child care. And this is important, of course, for the working families. It's important for anyone with children, but particularly for families with children in which both parents are employed. Extremely important in the Green Platform that we are reviewing today, the one brought about by the presidential candidate Jill Stein and her vice president candidate Ajamu Baraka. The health care as a right. This is an important step since the Democratic Party refused, under Hillary Clinton, refused the Sanders movement to have that single-payer health care become a right and become a platform in the Democratic Party platform of 2016. It was denied by the Hillary Clinton candidacy. Jill Stein, however, puts it in the Green Party platform to establish an improved Medicare for All single-payer public health program to provide everyone with quality health care. A huge savings by an estimated of $400 billion annually spent on the paperwork and bureaucracy of health insurance, no copay premiums or deductibles, access to all health care services including mental health, dental, and vision, to include everyone, period. No restrictions based on pre-existing illness, employment, immigration status, age, or any other criteria. To eliminate the cancer of national health insurance, which adds costs while reducing access to health care. To end overcharging for prescription drugs by using bulk purchasing negotiations. To eliminate health disparities in communities of color and low-income communities, to ensure easy access to health care in communities of color, including community health centers, to allow full access to contraceptive and reproductive care, to expand women's access to morning after contraception by lifting the Obama administration's ban. We have to admit here again that the Obama administration was a disaster and that Hillary Clinton will not be an improvement over the Obama administration's catastrophe. We've been asked here on a couple of occasions to explain why our opinion is that Barack Obama's presidency was a disaster. First of all, it's his failure to enact the single-payer health care, but rather to enact one which marginalized and shattered the idea of informing the hundreds, the tens of millions of Americans who are not, don't receive health care of any kind, and enabling the pharma industry to continue their stranglehold on the cost system, driving costs continually higher in the United States for prescription drugs. The primary crisis, however, is the fact that there is already a system, a single-payer system in place. It's called Medicare. Medicare for All would be a system easily implemented because it already has 30 million individuals who receive health care as a right. Making this a national health care would simply be an expansion of a healthcare system was extremely successful and easily paid for. This is the reason why the call for Jill Stein's Green Party to implement this single-payer health care makes sense and would be a tremendous improvement in the structure of the lives and health of 320 million Americans, persons living in the United States. So let's get a look at the other points mentioned in this right to health care. To avoid chronic diseases by investing in essential community health infrastructure such as local, fresh, organic food systems, pollution-free renewable energy, phasing out toxic chemicals, and achieve transportation such as bike paths and safe sidewalks that dovetail with public transportation. It's easy to organize a system when the system is set up so that the needs of the people are in the foreground rather than prevented by the interests of big business, big agro, big farmer, big oil, big military, big industrial. The crisis is that these 1% of America, and this was proven by not only the Sanders campaign, but also a book brought out called Capitalism in the 21st Century by Piketty, saying that 1% of America now controls 50% of its wealth, where 99% of America has to distribute the other 50%. And this incredibly unjust poor distribution of wealth is one of the major factors leading to the crisis that we see in injustice, not only in the usurping of rights of the black communities by law enforcement killing members of their communities by execution style, although individuals have offered no threat to law enforcement. Fleeing the scene is not a reason to kill blacks, but the idea being the Supreme Court saying that blacks, if police officers feel that they're in danger, that they are entitled to use deadly force. This is a position which just solidifies the racist nature of police in the United States and the demand by Black Lives Matter movement is just because where there is injustice anywhere leads to injustice everywhere. So the question about healthcare and the question of to prioritize preventive healthcare, including physical activity, healthy nutrition, and pollution prevention, which leads directly into the question of education. It's healthcare and education, two aspects of the improvement of the structure in the United States. The improvement of a structure such that individuals in America are educated so that they understand choices better, their own health choices, and then providing individuals in the United States with the opportunity to exercise these insights by choosing and by having health care made available to them, so that the question of the impoverishment of an entire family through the development of a precondition, a health condition which a family member, a wage earner providing for the income of the family would not be thrown out of work, and the costs of health care completely eliminate the possibility of the family to maintain any type of economic stability. By the implementation of a healthcare system, a single-payer healthcare system, this would be taken care of, solving the crisis of poverty due to a pre-existing condition in hundreds of thousands of families. The education as a right, the guaranteed tuition-free, world-class public education from preschool through university, to abolish student debt, to free a generation of Americans from debt and servitude, to protect our public school system from privatization. It is part of the efforts of the system in place now to privatize education, to drain the coffers of the middle class, so simply so that their children, offspring, will be able to earn a living, and shifting the cost of education from the public to private income. The public has a right to expect that education is good and leads them to the possibility of maintaining employment throughout their lives, and not to be marginalized, such as the educational system in the United States has shown repeatedly to be guilty of. To evaluate teacher performance through assessment by fellow professionals, and not to rely on high-stakes tests that reflect economic status of the community and punish teachers working in low-income communities of color. To replace Common Core with a curriculum developed by educators, not by corporations, with input from parents and communities. The general idea of the Green Party platform is to have a platform in which the public has an input in the decisions being made, and not simply have legislators and corporations make the decisions on how education is to be developed and what is to be learned in the curriculum. To stop using merit pay to punish teachers who work with the most challenging student populations. To restore art, music, and recreation to school curriculums. To ensure racially inclusive, sensitive, and relevant curriculums. To use the Green Party platform here, to use the development of education powers to offer grants and funding to encourage metropolitan designation plans based on socioeconomically balanced schools. To recognize poverty as a key obstacle to learning, to ensure that kids come to school ready to learn, healthy, nourished, secure, and free from violence. To increase federal funding of public schools. Important, of course, in the green structures that we see here in the Jill Stein platform for the Green Party of 2016 and her candidacy vice president candidate, Jamu Baraka, is a emphasis on the question of a just economy, because it's a just economy that is the basis for a just society. Without a just economy, the idea of a democratic structure is not possible, particularly not since the Supreme Court of the United States enacted the disastrous Citizens United, in which corporations and private donors are allowed to give as much money as they care to into the political campaign. This is a ridiculous development, an unjust one, and it's coincides simultaneously with the idea of and the reality of 50% of the wealth in the United States being owned by 1% of America. It's this injustice that's at the core of the buying of votes and the buying of democracy by the ruling elites. 1% controlling 50% of the economy is the basis of this undemocratic structure that we have. Getting back to a just economy is a position that the Green Party holds as central to their campaign. A just economy, to guarantee a living wage job for all, to set a $15 hourly federal minimum wage with indexing, to break up too big to fail banks and to democratize the Federal Reserve. It's common knowledge now that the Federal Reserve is a private organization controlling, like in a squid, the entire economic structure of the United States, and currently with a close to 0% interest rate, meaning that individuals who put their money in a savings account earn nothing, forcing them then, if they want to just keep up with inflation, to invest in the stock exchange. This is a manipulation of the economic system which only benefits the elites. It's an example of it, but one that doesn't have to be. It's a choice made by the elites and the Federal Reserve, not one that makes sense for 300 million Americans. The Wall Street big corporations and their rich pay their fair share of taxes. The fair share of taxes idea is at the center of the Green Party, as it was at the center of Bernie Sanders' campaign, to create democratically run public banks and utilities, to provide full protection for workplace rights, including the right to a safe workplace and the right to organize a union without fear of firing or reprisal by passing the Employees' Free Choice Act. To ensure equal pay for equal work, ending discrimination based on race, gender, and generation. To enact paid sick leave and family leave, strong overtime protections. To take action against wage theft. To organize a two-tier wage system for young people and individuals with disabilities. Also part of this is the freedom and equality rights of the Green Party. This is an important platform for the LGBT community, which has not received the support of the Democratic Party to the extent which it was necessary. The freedom and equality to expand women's rights, including equal pay and reproductive freedom, to pass the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment Act, so that there is no discrimination against women in the workplace. To protect the LGBTQIA and other people from discrimination. To defend indigenous rights, lands, and treaties. To support immigration rights, to create a welcoming path to citizenship for immigrants. To halt deportations and detentions of law-abiding undocumented immigrants, including the shameful practice of night raids being used to terrorize refugee families. To improve economic and social conditions abroad, to reduce the flow of immigrant refugees, in part by repealing NAFTA, ending the failed drug wars, and halting CIA and military interventions against democratically elected governments, such as the ones in South America, South and Central America, which led to the tens of thousands of immigrants from Central and South America migrating to the United States illegally, and the danger that they encounter in doing so. Demilitarize border crossings throughout North America, to protect a free internet, to oppose online piracy act, and other legislation that would undermine freedom of equality on the internet. Criminal justice reform, a central plank in the Green Party platform. And it's not only echoes of Black Lives Matter movement or the Black Lives movement, but central to Jill Stein's position politically. The platform reads, to end the failed war on drugs, to replace drug prohibition with harm reduction, to legalize marijuana and hemp, to treat substance abuse as a health problem, not a criminal offense. This is important, of course, to everyone in Massachusetts interested in the legalization of marijuana recreationally. The legislature in Massachusetts is a very conservative structure and interested in prohibiting the ballot initiative number 4 on the ballot in November 8th, legalizing marijuana. The reason why marijuana should be legalized is the fact that the criminalization of marijuana is disproportional to the fact of choice. It's a substance which is much less harmful than tobacco, or much less harmful than alcohol, and one which the criminalization of this substance is unjust. It was criminalized in the 1920s, as was other substances. But after the Prohibition, alcohol was allowed, but marijuana was continued to be a prohibitive substance. The decriminalization of marijuana, it makes sense because it could be taxed, and the tax put on this substance could be massively invested in the improvement of education and health care, and as we've seen in Colorado, massive amounts of taxes could be levied, raised, and used, part of which could be used for rehabilitation for drug offenses. It makes sense, and the reactionary level of the legislature in Massachusetts is a throwback to the 1920s, and not in the interest of the public in any case. So the criminal justice reform by the Green Party says the end the failed war on drugs, replace drug prohibition with harm reduction, legalize marijuana and hemp, and treat substance abuse as a health problem, not a criminal offense. To release nonviolent drug offenders from prison, removing such offenses from their records, to provide them with both free and post-relief support, to end police brutality, mass incarceration, and institutional racism within our justice system, to support the Black Lives Matter movement, to demilitarize police and end the use of SWAT teams and no-knock raids for drug and serving papers, to repair our communities rather than dump resources into the prison industrial complex, to establish police review boards so that communities control their police and not the other way around, to appoint dedicated investigators to investigate every death of serious or serious injury at the hands of the police, to enact laws to require independent outside legal representatives to investigate and prosecute any killing or brutality by the police rather than prosecutions involved in local criminal justice system, to eliminate harsh mandatory sentencing requirements which often result in unjustified sentences. That is the Green Party platform to criminal justice reform. Jill Stein's further platform is a justice for all, which we consider to be extremely sensible and one with 8 different planks. Let's get a look at them singularly. To enforce the Bill of Rights by protecting the rights of free speech and protest, to be secure from unwarranted search and seizure, such as the stop and frisk policy by police in New York and elsewhere, and the invasion of privacy as well as our other constitutional rights. For instance, the right of police to simply kill individuals when the police, feel that they're endangered. This is a complete this is the superiority of the right of police to maintain their lives by killing those around them, although the danger may not be even when someone is fleeing from you. That is the question, whether or not the police have the right to kill them, and that is the question. police do not or should not be allowed to be judge, jury, and executioner in a suspected crime. If it's a crime, then it should be investigated and justice should be served. But the police cannot be judge, jury, and executioner at will. That is, however, what the Black Lives Matter is calling for an investigation of. So, to terminate unconstitutional surveillance and unwarranted spying, to close Guantanamo Bay, to repeal indefinite detention without charge or trial, to repeal the unconstitutional provisions of the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, that give the president the power to indefinitely imprison and even assassinate American citizens without due process. The NDAA is a criminal act initiated by the Obama administration and signed into law by the Obama administration. It's one of the heinous crimes that Obama administration is guilty of. That and the drone warfare. America's youth should not be put in jail for offenses they commit. 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds should not be put in jail for criminal offense. They should be rehabilitated. They have not reached the a state in which they actually see their own position in reference to the crime they are accused of. And putting them in prison though they were an adult is a violation of justice. To end discrimination against former offenders who have paid for their crimes and should be allowed to get a fresh start. To abolish the death penalty. To end prosecution of government, corporate, and media whistleblowers. To ensure an executive order prohibiting federal agencies from conspiring with local police to infringe upon the right of assembly and peaceful protest. To repeal the Patriot Act that violates our constitutional right to privacy and protection against unreasonable search and seizure. The Green Party campaign platform continues with peace and human rights. Jill Stein is the presidential candidate in this Green Party platform, Peace and Human Rights. And the first plank is to establish a foreign policy based on diplomacy, international law, human rights, and nonviolence support for democratic movements around the world. To cut military spending by at least 50% and to close 700 or more foreign military bases, to ensure a just transition that replaces reductions in military jobs with jobs in renewable energy, transportation, and green infrastructure development. To stop U.S. financial and military support to human rights abuses, barring substantial changes in their policies. This would include Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Egypt. It should also include Turkey as well. To end the U.S. role in the world's arms supplier. The U.S. is the primary arms supplier worldwide, and part of the catastrophe which is led by the military-industrial complex, the creation of war zones in which the military supplies the weapon, creates the war conditions, the fear in America of terrorism, and creates the wars which then initiate individuals to seek revenge because they've seen their families killed and dismembered. It says to cut military spending by at least 50% and to close the 700 plus military bases to ensure a just transition that replaces reductions in military jobs with jobs in renewable energy, transportation, and green infrastructure development, to stop U.S. financial and military support to human rights abusers, barring substantial changes in their policy. This would include Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Egypt, and of course Turkey as well. To end the U.S. role as the world's arms supplier. To end the use of assassination as an instrument of U.S. military power. To end destructive U.S. Economic and military intervention into the affairs of sovereign nations, such as such interventions serve the interests of multinational corporations and global capitalism over the interests of the vast majority of citizens of those nations. To freeze the bank accounts of countries that are funding terrorism, including Saudi Arabia, the Wahhabi dynasty. To restore the National Guard as the centerpiece of our defense. To ban the use of drone aircraft for assassination, bombing, and other offensive purposes. To end the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, withdrawing troops and military contractors. To join 159 other nations in signing the Ottawa Treaty banning the use of anti-personnel landmines. To lead a global nuclear disarmament campaign. To join the anti-ballistic missile treaty, which the United States dropped out of in 2002, and which installed missiles and missile bases in Turkey, Romania, and Poland. To agree to Russia's proposal to jointly reduce U.S. and Russian nuclear arsenals to 1,000 nuclear weapons each. Each call for all countries to the table to negotiate a treaty for the complete elimination of nuclear weapons. To remove U.S. nuclear weapons in Germany, Turkey, Belgium, Italy, and the Netherlands. To support Russia and China's joint efforts to open negotiations on a treaty to ban weapons in space. To pledge to end any further laboratory or subcritical nuclear tests at the Nevada and the Novaya Zemlya test sites, and end all nuclear weapons research, design, and modernization at the weapons laboratories. The U.S. must take and lead in nuclear disarmament by itself, starting to disarm. We should create a nuclear-free zone in the Middle East region, require all nations in the area to join. That's including Israel. To empower the people, to fix our broken elections and create a real democracy. This is an important part of the Green Party platform. To eliminate the doctrine of corporate personhood that, among other things, has been used to justify unlimited corporate spending in elections, with constitutional amendment to clarify that only human beings have constitutional rights. To enact electoral reforms that break the big money stranglehold and create a true representative democracy. To protect voters' rights by enforcing and expanding the constitutional right to vote. To restore Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, requiring pre-clearance by the Attorney General or Federal District Court, D.C., for election law changes in areas previously found to limit voting rights. To abolish the Electoral College and directly elect the president using a national popular vote with ranked voting choice. This is a primary demand for any Democratic individual. anyone interested in democracy must recognize that regardless of the popular vote, the people do not vote the President of the United States. It may be coincidental that the popular vote matches with the Electoral College, but it is the Electoral College, in any case, a system of elites, of paid and privileged individuals who make the decision as to who is President of the United States. This needs to be changed very quickly. It's the popular vote. It's one man, one vote, one woman, one vote, one person, one vote, and not the Electoral College who would determine who is President of the United States. To restore the rights to run for office and eliminate unopposed races by removing ballot access barriers. To guarantee equal access to the debates by all ballot qualified candidates. To provide equal and free access to the airways for all ballot qualified candidates, not just those with big campaign donors. To eliminate winner-take-all first past to post elections in which the winner may not have to support may not have the support of most of the voters. To replace that system with ranked choice voting and proportional representation. To enact statehood for the District of Columbia to ensure the region has full representation in Congress and full powers of democratic self-rule. To restore voting rights to offenders, to including while in prison. To replace partisan oversight of elections with nonpartisan election commissioners. To reduce barriers to voting by making Election Day a national holiday. That's a no-brainer.